All right. In this video, I wanted to go over three identity-based models for career development. So basically, there's three different models that kind of explore various elements of a person's identity and how that impacts their career and life decision making. So that's the agenda for this brief video. So the first one is a video or a model by James Marcia. So James Marcia was a social psychologist who developed this model of identity development. And they're the identity statuses. And their identity statuses weren't just meant to be applied towards career development. It was just like any identity that we're exploring and trying to commit to was applicable to this model. But I think it's found a lot of relevance for career decision making and career identity development. So I'm going to share my screen really quick and share a visual here. All right, so here it is, and I don't think this is the best image, but it works for now, and I'll explain why I don't think it's the best in just a moment. But the core thought behind James Marcia's identity statuses is that we are in one of four statuses, one of these four areas. And it's a matrix between identity commitment, so committing to an identity, and identity exploration. So to what degree are we exploring our identity? So the one thing that I think could be a little bit different, like my practical experience doing a lot of career development work and career counseling work, is that it's not as dichotomous as it makes it seem here. It's not just like, yes, I've committed, or no, I haven't. It's like on a spectrum. So I think this line here would be better to be like a spectrum. To what degree have I committed? Maybe if it's a 1 to 10 scale, 10 is I've fully committed to something, 1 I haven't at all committed. Like people might be at a 3, so they're kind of committed but not strongly, or maybe a 6, that they're more on the yes side of commitment, but still that could vacillate back to not being committed. The same with identity exploration. Have I explored, or no, I haven't, is too dichotomous. It could be like, yes, I've explored in some ways and I need to do more. So it might be like, on, once again, the scale of 1 to 10, with 10 is like significant exploration, 1 is minimal exploration. If someone's done, like, maybe looked up Google for different career options, maybe that's like a 2 of exploration. Maybe a 10 would be, hey, I've looked up Google information, I've done career assessments, I've gone to career counseling, I've job shadowed, I've done occupational interviews, I've done an internship in the career field that I'm interested in. So I've done all these various, informational exploration, but also action-based exploration activities to see where I lie. So yeah, the individual who has committed to an identity and also has thoroughly explored that identity would be what James Marcia referred to as identity achievement. So maybe they were once lost, but now they're found. They've kind of found their identity. And so then the person who is, okay, I'm actively exploring, but I'm not yet committed. They're in this place called moratorium. And this is a place of generally a place of anxiety, where clients and individuals don't really want to be in that place for a long time. They're actively trying to get out of that and find commitment. So moratorium tends to be a place where they might seek out career counseling or career development support, but they're not. They're trying to figure things out. So that's the no commitment yet, but actively exploring. Then this is where foreclosure to me is a pretty interesting place where a lot of individuals who maybe need some career development support aren't receiving it because they're believing or thinking that, yeah, like, I've done enough to explore maybe, but they really haven't. So they haven't really explored, but they've committed to an identity. So they're saying, hey, like, they're unknowingly lost is how I often put it. So they've foreclosed themselves off to more exploration that would deepen their career identity and their career stability and clarity. So foreclosure is often a place where maybe, like, I was in a place of foreclosure where I hadn't done much exploration. It was like the Google information or some decent career information resources that I'd looked up, but I hadn't done anything about taking classes into it, interviewing anyone, job shadowing, nothing like that at all. So I was thinking of going into the medical field as like a physician of some sort, but like felt like, yep, that's the thing for me to do as a freshman, but in college. But then quickly I started taking the course and I was like, oh, I'm no longer in this foreclosure place. I'm no longer committed to this. So I moved more quickly to this moratorium identity where I wasn't committed, but I knew that I needed to explore more. Then the last one is identity diffusion. This one's a really interesting status to me. It's where, no one, they're not committing, they're not committed to an identity, but they're also not exploring. So to me, I've often described this as being drifters, an identity drifter, where it's almost as if they're like kayaking down this identity river of their life and they're just going wherever the stream takes them. So maybe some students who show up in college are just, maybe there's a strong push at their high school or to go to college. So they just, okay, I'll sign up for the SAT, ACT, I'll get into college and just kind of do that thing. But there's no strong commitment, there's no strong exploration, there's no strong internal motivation. They're just kind of maybe following like an external script for their life. So I've often used this model with students. I just show them this and I go through just similar to what I just did in this video as I talk about these different statuses, and I invite them to talk in pairs or just think to themselves, where are you at? Which status seems to represent your career identity at this point? And so then they talk about that and explore that. And then it's like, okay, so what are your next steps? What do you think need to be your next steps to increase your commitment or increase your exploration activities? So then it gets them thinking, okay, so if I'm in this foreclosure place, and it's interesting, a lot of students are often pretty honest of like, oh yeah, like I've committed, but I haven't really done much to explore. I think some students also think they're in identity achievement, but they're really not. So, and that's okay. This is like a recycling process. In the Scharf text, Donald Super talked about this idea of, or in his model, this idea of like recycling, that we might be at one place in development, but then recycle back to a different space. So it's okay to be an identity achievement. And if there's some sort of rupture or like developmentally significant event occurs, then we can shift back to moratorium for closure, wherever. So once again, it's just this model I think can help kind of navigate the waters of identity and help people figure out where they're at. So that's James Marcia's model. Now another identity base. This is less a model, more just some research. It's a little bit dated, but I think it's some relevant concepts. So in 2002, Jackson and Schurman, and for those who have the Scharf text, the 2013 text, it's on page 253 is where I'm getting some of this information. That there was some research done on females and female identity development, career identity development. And the research that was done by Jackson and Schurman came up with 6 general themes of kind of more, I guess, relevant constructs or relevant themes that some working females explore. So it's not like I'm trying to think to put my words carefully, because it's like it's not necessarily going to apply to every single population or every single female population. And I think it applies to not just female development either, but the studies, at least this study represented it with females. So there are six themes there. So I'll just read through them briefly, then talk about a couple of them. All right. So the first was joint decision making with their partner about work and family. So that was often, significant and a really important process to engage in, is this joint decision making. And then number 2 was developing creative alternative work schedules. So not being like pigeonholed into, kind of like a rigid structure, but wanting flexibility to kind of fit life and work together in a more creative fashion, a more workable fashion. And then number 3 was that there's this desire to enjoy work. Not just see it as just like a necessary evil to earn a living. Number 4, feeling good about being able to juggle work and family. So that balancing act was important, at least finding it from this study. Then number 5 was being uncertain how work and family desires and obligations would evolve. So that was significant. And throughout time, you might think that you want one thing, and then the unknowns of life and of identity exploration development can shift those priorities. But then I guess that leads to number 6 being about priorities as well. So giving up some things, money or promotion, in exchange for other things, time with children, personal time. So there might just be this stage of like trying to prioritize life of what do I really want the larger picture of my life to look like. And once again, I totally get that this is a 2002 article, over 20 years old. So it's not all going to be relevant to every single like female, age demographic. But I think it just shares how, different types of identities can have unique aspects of, and influence in the career development process. Uh, I just wanted to briefly just talking about like the being able to juggle work and family. I once had a client who was actually a male client, but this client was really in his 50s, had a family, was working but also going to graduate school full time, and was really kind of confused about his career path, unsure what if he wanted to even do that graduate program. But often our work became about just like balancing family and his relationship with his kids. And that seemed to be like more of the core theme to our work than the decision making about like the graduate program. And at one point I just basically said, it seems like the major process and the major thing that you're really wanting to work on is your relationship with your kids. And he just like sat there and thought for a second, and he's like, yeah. And we were done with our work shortly thereafter because he's just like, you know what? I think this really is less of like a career decision. It's just like I'm feeling unsettled in my life as a father to my kids. So he started to work on that, and his career clarity came next. So I think this speaks to the holistic nature of career development and career decision making, that it's not just like an isolated identity development process, but it's holistic. It intersects with all of our other life roles and experiences. Uh, yeah, I think that I'll pause with that one and go to the very last model. So the last model, once again, in the sharp text, in the 2013 text, it'll be on page 257. So I wanted to speak to the minority identity development model. Uh, so this one is just kind of trying to represent how minority individuals from minority identities might be developing uh, in general. So this model, once again, is similar to Marcia's in that it wasn't specifically meant to apply just to like career development, as more just general minority identity development. And once again, this won't represent all minority experiences, but gives some ideas of how some could be experiencing the world. Let me, similar to before, I'm just going to share my screen. So here is just a little snapshot of that minority identity development model. So just a summary here. So there's 5 stages here of conformity to dissonance, resistance and immersion, introspection, and then the synergistic articulation and awareness. So it goes in these 4 columns here of attitude towards self, attitude toward others of the same minority group or of different minority groups, and then attitude toward dominant group. So as you can kind of see, that the conformity stage is where the dominant group is idealized and pursued. At least that's kind of how Atkinson, Morten, and Sue described this experience of like the relationship toward the dominant group is, wow, that's the ideal group. That's the appreciating group. And then self-deprecating was the attitude towards self, as well as group depreciating. And then discriminatory like perspectives towards other minority groups. But then it goes through this stage of like, okay, wait, I'm starting to experience more dissonance, to where I'm not like, there's this conflict, as it says here, between can I value myself as a unique minority individual that doesn't necessarily intersect fully or at all with the dominant group. Or maybe this is where I think, particularly in stage 3, the resistance, that's where there could start to be more resentment and bitterness, and kind of towards the dominant group. Of, once again, this is where the dominant group is then kind of seen in this negative light of like, this is this oppressive or this dominant group that has been holding me back, or have been kind of imposing these beliefs about myself upon me. So this is where stage 3 starts to become more about like, oh, here's who I want to value, who I am in my uniqueness and in my minority identity. And I value my group minority identity and those who share that identity with me. Uh, And then here it says with other different minorities, there might be this conflict between feelings of empathy for minority experiences and feelings of cultural centrism. So basically, it's like this mix of like I can really empathize towards other minorities, and I'm really strongly aligning with my own minority identity as like the most significant model of kind of how to view the world. Then it gets to this introspection place, and starts to really even think about, okay, so concerned with the basis for self-appreciation. So it's just like really even thinking more deeply about who am I? Should I just always value myself based on just this one minority identity? Uh, and that kind of goes into the group identity. Should I view like this group appreciation? Should that be my unique focus, my main appreciation focus? And with stage 5 of the synergetic articulation awareness, a lot of times in identity development models, it gets to be like, okay, so my minority identity is very important to me, but there's other pieces to my identity as well. So it's almost like I synthesize my minority identity into my fuller like life, or my life work, or my life career, or my life circumstance. So it's one of several important factors, but it's not the primary uh, aspect of sense of self. So I guess the what I want to encourage you to think about is like, how does that identity development model apply to career development? Does it? I think it does, and I'd encourage you to reflect. I think a lot of times it this goes for like a lot of identity development models, but I think it works well for the minority identity model. Is that a lot of times counseling or coaching or just career development work in general can be about counseling during those transition points. So if it's like, okay, there's a client who's starting to move from conformity to dissidence from stage 1 to 2, those it's not like you just move and then you're there. Like the lines between those stages are really relevant. I think that's where a lot of counseling work of why clients come in, is because they're experiencing this friction that I'm shifting in who I am. I'm shifting in how I see the world, and maybe that's shifting and rocking the boat with the relationships around me or the systems around me. So for example, one client who came in my counseling work, it was all about being really dissatisfied with the career setting, and not resonating at all with a lot of the white colleagues and white customers that this client was working with. He was Latino, identified as Latino, and yeah, he basically just said, I don't like white people, and he was really kind of maybe in the stage 3 space of like of the 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 view of the dominant culture was very negative, and kind of like there is this frustration and anger towards a lot of white individuals. And we process that in our relationship of making sense of like, okay, so i'm I'm white, so like what's that like for you to be making sense of this with the white counselor? So we were able to talk about that and make that a part of the counseling work. And ultimately, like, he came into a clinical mental health setting, but the ultimately, like, his resolution of being done in our work together was like kind of finding out, okay, am I going to quit my job? Am I going to like find, I believe, if I'm remembering right, it's been about a decade ago. Uh, but I think he quit that job or was just kind of shifting to a new career. That was like the resolution of his concerns, is like, yeah, that's just no longer fitting for me, and I need to kind of find a better fit. So that's one example of how this model could be applicable, of making sense of kind of inner minority identity experiences and how that intersects with colleagues or with customers or with whoever you're working with, or whatever context or system that you're a part of. So yeah, those are just a few ideas, a few models. Once again, not exhaustive, somewhat dated, but I think still pretty applicable, or potentially applicable models that can be relevant to career development work. So happy to answer any questions or chat about it, and looking forward to those connections.